My family took my grandmother's gift while I was away, then the bank called with news nobody expected. My name is Leila Nazari. I'm 38 years old. On the morning of September 4, 2021, I received a phone call from a bank in Maryland. The caller was a representative from the Estate and Trust Division. She was calling about an account that was listed in my name as a beneficiary. She wanted to confirm that I had received the notice regarding the account's closure and the disbursement of its funds. I told her I had not received any notice. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ms. Nazari, the account was closed in July of this year. A disbursement was made at that time. Are you saying you did not receive the disbursement?" I told her I had not received anything related to any account at their institution. Another pause. Longer. "I see," she said carefully. "I'm going to need to connect you with a senior representative." The senior representative told me what had happened. The account had been opened by my grandmother, Maryam Nazari, in 2008. It was a savings account. I had been listed as the sole beneficiary since the account's opening. The account had grown over 13 years of regular deposits. At the time of my grandmother's death in April 2021, it held $312,000. The account had been closed in July 2021, 3 months after my grandmother died. The funds had been disbursed to a beneficiary. The representative could not, over the phone, tell me who had received the disbursement. She told me I needed to come to the branch. I was in London. I had been living in London for 4 years, working for an international consulting firm on a series of European projects. I called my mother in Maryland. She told me there must be some mistake. She told me this with the specific quality of someone who knows there is no mistake. I flew to Maryland the following week. What I found over the following 14 months changed my understanding of my family, my grandmother, and the specific way that love sometimes has to protect itself from the people it is surrounded by. Stay with me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This story starts earlier than the phone call. It starts with a woman who came from Iran in 1979 with very little and spent 42 years making sure that what she built would reach the right person. My grandmother, Maryam Nazari, was born in 1942 in Tabriz. She was the eldest daughter of a family that had, by the standards of northwestern Iran in the mid-20th century, a reasonable amount and a clear understanding of what education could produce for a woman who was given access to it. She was given access to it. She finished university in 1964 with a degree in nursing, one of the first cohorts of women to complete the nursing program at her university. She worked as a hospital nurse for 7 years in Tabriz. She married my grandfather Dariush in 1966. He was a civil engineer. They had 2 children, my mother Shiren, born in 1968, and my uncle Farhad, born in 1971. They came to the United States in 1979, at the beginning of the revolution, with a specific combination of urgency and deliberateness that characterizes families who understand they are making a permanent rather than a temporary move. They settled in Maryland, in Silver Spring, where there was already a significant Iranian community, and they began again. My grandmother returned to nursing within a year. She spent 26 years as a registered nurse in the Maryland hospital system, retiring in 2005. She was known at the hospital where she worked longest as someone who was precise about documentation, relentless in the pursuit of accuracy, and constitutionally unable to leave anything she considered important in an unclear state. These qualities characterized everything she did. Her patient records were exemplary. Her household finances were meticulous. Her relationships with her children and grandchildren were organized with the specific care of someone who understood that love is not just a feeling but a set of decisions made over time, and that those decisions compound. She also had qualities that were less professionally visible but equally important. She was funny, dry and quick, the humor of someone who has seen enough of the world to find its pretensions absurd. She was direct in a way that could startle people who were not accustomed to it. She had opinions about everything from policy to cooking, and she shared them without excessive concern for whether you had asked. She also, from 2008 until her death in 2021, was making deposits into a savings account at a bank in Silver Spring. Regular deposits, sometimes modest and sometimes larger, always consistent. She told no one about the account except me. She told me in 2015, when I was 32 years old and was making a decision about whether to accept the London assignment. I need to tell you about my family before I tell you about the account, because you cannot understand what happened without understanding the landscape that my grandmother was navigating. My mother, Sharon, is 66 years old. She has spent most of her adult life in Silver Spring, within a few miles of where she was raised after emigrating. She is a bookkeeper who has worked for various small businesses over the years and who has maintained, throughout her adult life, the kind of financial situation that is always slightly behind where she intended to be. Not because she earns too little, because she spends in ways that outpace her earning, and because she has never fully resolved the specific anxiety about money that seems to emerge from her particular history. My father, whom I will mention only briefly because he is not central to this story. He and my mother divorced when I was 11. He lives in California. We are in occasional contact. He has nothing to do with what happened. My uncle Farhad is 62. He is my grandmother's son, my mother's brother. He works in real estate, residential sales and property management in the Maryland area. He has done well by any external measure. He has a house in Bethesda, a second property in Delaware, a network of professional contacts that he manages with the attentiveness that good real estate professionals apply to relationships. He is charming in the specific way of someone who has built a career around making people feel comfortable, and this charm is genuine in most contexts and instrumental in others. My relationship with Farhad has always been complicated. He has the quality of someone who is kind to you when your needs align and less reliably present when they don't. I have never been able to determine whether this is deliberate or whether it is simply who he is, and I have learned to stop trying to determine it. My cousin Daria is Farhad's daughter. She is 34. She and I grew up in proximity and have always had the relationship of cousins who see each other at family occasions and maintain a kind of ambient connection that is warm but not deep. She works in marketing. She is not central to the main action of the story, but she is relevant to its edges. These are the people who were in the room when the decisions were made. I was not in the room. I was in London. The London assignment came in early 2015. I had been working for the firm for 6 years at that point, an international management consulting firm with offices in several cities, and had built a specialization in infrastructure project management that was proving useful in the context of European development projects. The London assignment was a 4-year contract that could extend. It was the right professional move at the right time. I called my grandmother before I called anyone else. This was my habit. She was the person whose judgment I trusted most completely, and her response to things helped me understand what I actually thought. I told her about the assignment. She asked specific questions. What was the project? Who was I working with? What were the living conditions? What did I think I would learn? When I had answered all the questions, she said, "You should go." I asked if she was certain. She said, "I am 73 years old. I have been certain about a small number of things in my life. This is one of them." I asked her why she was certain. She said, "Because you have built something that you have not yet fully used. Going to London will let you use it. Staying here will let you be comfortable, which is not the same thing." Then she said, "I want to show you something before you go." We met the following week at her house in Silver Spring, the house she had lived in since 1986, the house my mother had grown up in and that I had spent large portions of my childhood in. She took me to the small desk in her bedroom where she kept personal papers. She opened the drawer and took out a folder. Inside the folder was a bank statement. She showed it to me. The account had been opened in 2008. 7 years of deposits. The balance was $187,000 at the time. "I opened this when I understood something about this family," she said. "I opened it so that something would be specifically yours, so that no family conversation could reach it." "Why specifically mine?" I asked. She looked at me. Because you are the one who is going somewhere, she said. And because when you come back from wherever you go, I want there to be something waiting for you that is not complicated by anyone else's needs or ideas about what you should do with it. I started to say something about my mother, about Farhad, about the other people in the family who might. I know what I am saying, she said. And I know what I'm not saying. You don't need to fill in the gaps. I understood. She had seen something in the family that she could not address directly, and she had built a protection around the edges of what she could see coming. She gave me the account details. She told me I was the beneficiary. She told me the account was at a specific branch of a specific bank and that I should contact them after she died to claim what was mine. She also said, "Tell no one. Not your mother. Not your uncle. No one." I told no one. I went to London. The 4 years in London. I want to describe this period because it is part of the story even though it is not the part where things happen. The years in London were the years in which I became the person who would eventually need what my grandmother had prepared. The work was exactly what she had predicted, a use of what I had built in ways that staying would not have allowed. The projects I managed were large and complex and required forms of professional judgment that I had never previously had to exercise alone, without the support structures of an office environment where I could ask someone who was more senior. I made mistakes and corrected them, and learned from them in the specific way that you can only learn from mistakes that were entirely yours. I also had the specific education of being away from my family for an extended period. This sounds obvious. Of course you learn things about a family when you are not in it. But what I mean is more specific than that. I learned the shape of my family by watching it from London, through calls and messages and the occasional visit, in a way that being inside it had not allowed me to see. I could see, from London, that my mother's financial situation was not improving. I could see that my uncle Farhad was in her life in ways that were helpful but that also produced a specific kind of dependency. She relied on him for advice about various practical matters, and this reliance gave him a quality of authority in her household that I found, watching from a distance, slightly uncomfortable. I could also see, from London, that my grandmother was aging. She was in her late 70s and then 80 when I went, and in her early 80s as the years passed. She was still sharp, completely, entirely sharp, with the precision about language and fact that had always characterized her. But she was moving more slowly. She needed more help with practical matters. And the people who were helping her with those practical matters were my mother and Farhad. I called my grandmother twice a week. These calls were long and wide-ranging. She told me about her garden and about the book she was reading and about a neighbor who was being inconsiderate about where she parked her car. She asked me about the projects and the people I worked with and what I was reading. She remembered details from previous calls and asked follow-up questions. She was, throughout all of this, entirely herself. She was also, I understood later, paying attention to things she did not mention, watching what was happening around her in the house and in the family. Noticing. She died in April 2021. She was 78 years old. A stroke, sudden, in the morning, in her kitchen. My mother found her. I flew home for the funeral. The weeks after my grandmother's funeral, I was in Maryland for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I was fully present for the family in the way that death requires. The gathering, the arrangements, the specific communal grief of losing a person who has been at the center of a family for decades. Farhad organized many things. He was organized and efficient, and I was, in the immediate aftermath of my grandmother's death, grateful for it. He managed the death certificate, the funeral arrangements, the initial conversations about the estate. My grandmother's estate was modest in its formal structure. The Silver Spring House, which my mother was the primary heir to. My grandmother had explicitly discussed this with me and with my mother over the years, and the will reflected it. Personal property distributed among family members. A small savings account that was part of the estate and whose balance was modest. There was no mention of the account. I noticed this. Not with alarm, not yet. But I noticed. I was in a state of grief that was genuine and consuming. and I was also in London on a contract that still had several months to run, and I made the decision that I would address the account after I returned to Maryland permanently in August. The contract ended in August 2021. I returned to Maryland. The phone call from the bank came in September. When I arrived at the bank branch in Silver Spring, I met with the senior representative who had spoken to me on the phone. Her name was Dana. She was careful and professional, and she had, I could see, understood the shape of the situation from the phone call and was managing her own discomfort with it. She showed me the account records. The account had been closed on July 14, 2021. The full balance, $312,000, had been disbursed. To whom had it been disbursed? Dana showed me the authorization form. The disbursement had been made to Farhad Nazari. He had presented himself to the bank as the executor of Maryam Nazari's estate. He had provided a copy of the death certificate. He had provided documentation of his role in the estate. He had signed an authorization requesting that the account be closed and the funds disbursed to the estate's account. Dana said, carefully, the account was a savings account with a beneficiary designation. As a beneficiary, you had a direct claim to the account that was independent of the estate. The account should not have been included in estate assets. The disbursement to the estate was not consistent with the account's structure. I asked her what the bank's position was. She said, "We are reviewing the transaction internally." The documentation provided by Mr. Farhad Nazari characterized the account as an estate asset. Our representative who processed the closure did not flag the beneficiary designation conflict. This was an error on our part as well. We are prepared to cooperate with any legal process you initiate. The bank had made an error. Farhad had made representations that were, at minimum, incomplete, and possibly deliberately misleading. And $312,000 had gone somewhere that was not me. I called my attorney. My attorney in Maryland was a man named Robert Chesak, who had been recommended to me by a colleague at my firm who had used his services in a contract dispute. Robert practiced business and estate law and had handled a number of contested estate matters over his 20-year career. I met with him the day after the bank visit. I brought everything I had: the bank's account records that Dana had provided, the copy of the account statement my grandmother had showed me in 2015 that I had photographed at the time, the notes I had taken during the bank visit, and my own recollection of my grandmother's specific instructions about the account. Robert reviewed everything and asked specific questions. "What is your evidence that you were the sole beneficiary?" he asked. I showed him the bank records. The beneficiary designation had been on the account since 2008. My name. My social security number. Sole beneficiary. The designation had not been changed. The beneficiary designation supersedes the estate, he said. This account was not estate property. Your uncle had no authority to claim it as estate property. Even if he was the estate executor, his authority as executor did not extend to non-estate property. He told the bank he was the executor, I said. But he was not the executor in fact. I'll want to see the probate filings. We obtained the probate filings. My grandmother's will had named my mother Shiren as the executor of the estate. Not Farhad. My mother. Farhad had gone to the bank, representing himself as the executor of the estate, when he was not the executor of the estate. Robert set his pen down on his notepad and looked at me. "Ms. Nazari," he said, "what your uncle did to obtain access to that account involved misrepresentation to the bank. The fact that the bank did not catch the beneficiary designation conflict is a contributing factor, but it does not excuse the misrepresentation. The bank has indicated they are cooperating with any legal process. You have a strong basis for a claim. Can I recover the funds?" I asked. "That depends on where the funds are and what condition they are in. If your uncle has spent the money, recovery becomes more complicated. We need to find out immediately." He filed the initial legal papers that week. What happened over the following 6 months was the specific combination of legal process and family upheaval that I had anticipated, and that was, in its actual form, worse than my anticipation. The legal process moved in the way that legal processes move, with the momentum of formal procedures, each step producing the next, the documentation accumulating. Robert sent a demand letter to Farhad's attorney. Farhad had retained one within days of Robert's initial filing, which told Robert that Farhad had been expecting something. The demand letter described the account, the beneficiary designation, Farhad's misrepresentation to the bank, and the fund's disbursement, and demanded a full accounting of what had been done with the $312,000. The response to the demand letter came 3 weeks later. It was, Robert noted, better than the response he sometimes received in these matters. Not a denial, but a characterization. Farhad's attorney described his client's actions as an administrative error made in good faith while managing a complex estate. The account had been included in the estate inadvertently. The misrepresentation of his role as executor was a miscommunication. He was prepared to discuss how to address any legitimate claims. Administrative error, Robert said, reading the letter. He presented himself as the executor when he was not. That is not an administrative error. But the language tells us they are not going to fight this to the end. They are looking for a resolution. The family upheaval was different in kind from the legal process and in some ways harder. I called my mother the same day I filed the legal papers. I had not told her about the account before this. I had kept my grandmother's instruction for 6 years and through her death and through the grief. But the legal filing was going to reach her regardless, and I preferred she hear it from me. I told her about the account. About 2015. About what my grandmother had shown me and what she had said. About the bank call in September. About Farhad's visit to the bank in July. My mother listened without interrupting. This was unusual for her. She interrupts. The silence during this phone call was a specific quality of silence that I recognized as her managing something that was too large for her usual processing speed. When I finished, she said, Farhad told me that account was part of the estate. He said he had handled it. He told you about the account? I asked. He said there was a bank account that had been overlooked in the initial estate work and that he was handling it. He said it would go into the estate funds. He knew the account existed, I said. He must have found it somehow, she said. Maybe he went through her papers. And he told you it was an estate asset. Yes. Did he show you the account documentation? Did he tell you who the beneficiary was? A long pause. No, she said. He said it was routine. I trusted him to handle it. Mama, I said. You are the executor of Nana's estate, not Farhad. He went to the bank representing himself as the executor. He was not the executor. The silence this time was different. Longer. The silence of someone understanding something and needing to stay inside the understanding for a moment before they can respond to it. He told them he was the executor? Yes. But You are the executor. Yes. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said something that surprised me. She said, I want to see him about this. Before I say anything else, I want to talk to him. I respected this. I did not try to prevent it. Whatever conversation she needed to have with her brother was hers to have. She called me back 4 days later. The conversation she reported having with Farhad lasted 3 hours. She said he began by saying it was a misunderstanding. That he had been trying to help manage the estate efficiently. That the account had been discovered in a way that led him to believe it was part of the estate. That he had moved quickly and had not fully verified the account structure. She had pushed. She is not someone who accepts a characterization that does not match the facts when she understands the facts. She asked him how he had known about the account if it had been my grandmother's private account. She asked why he had told the bank he was the executor when he knew she was the executor. She asked what had been done with the funds. On the first question, he said he had found it in my grandmother's papers while helping clean the house. On the second question, he said he had made an error in how he described his role. On the third question, what had been done with the $312,000, His answer was the one that determined the direction of everything that followed. He had transferred the funds from the estate account to two places. $180,000 had gone to a personal account in his name. $132,000 had gone to my mother, which he described as her share of the estate. $180,000 in a personal account. My mother had asked him whether that was his portion of the estate. He had said, "I managed everything. I put in significant time. The $180,000 represents compensation for my time and the real estate consultation I provided." My mother had said, "You consulted your own client to buy the house. You were not supposed to receive compensation from the estate for that." This was a detail I had not yet known. When the Silver Spring house was sold, it was sold as part of the estate administration, with the proceeds going to my mother. Farhad had represented the buyer. He was the buyer's real estate agent. His commission had come from the transaction. He had received a real estate commission from the sale of his own mother's house, from the buyer he had brought to the transaction, while also taking $180,000 from an account that was not a legitimate estate asset. My mother had ended the conversation. She called me back and told me everything. Then she said, "Tell me what I need to do." What my mother needed to do, Robert told us, was to formally assert her role as executor and to file a complaint with the probate court about the mismanagement of the estate. This was separate from my claim on the account, which was a direct claim against Farhad for the misappropriation of a non-estate asset. But the two claims were related. The same behavior that had produced the unauthorized account closure had also involved misrepresentation about his role, and the same funds were at the center of both. My mother filed the complaint. This was not something she did lightly. She is 66 years old and Farhad is her brother, the person she has been in relationship with for 62 years, and the act of filing a legal complaint against him required a specific kind of courage that I want to acknowledge. She said, when I thanked her for it, "Your grandmother would have expected me to do it. That is enough." The probate court process and the civil claim process ran in parallel over the following several months. The probate complaint resulted in a formal investigation of the estate administration. The finding was that Farhad had acted as a de facto estate manager without legal authority to do so, that he had made representations to financial institutions that were materially inaccurate regarding his legal status, and that the estate administration had not been conducted in accordance with the will. The finding also addressed the real estate transaction. Farhad had failed to disclose to my mother, the executor, that he would be receiving a commission from the sale of the estate's primary asset. This was a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed. The commission, approximately $41,000 on the sale price, was ordered to be repaid to the estate. On the civil claim, the bank's cooperation was instrumental. They had retained their own counsel, who participated in the proceedings to address the bank's role in the unauthorized closure. The bank's position was that they had been deceived, that the misrepresentation about Farhad's status as executor had produced a processing error that would not have occurred with accurate information. The bank agreed to a settlement that partially offset their responsibility for the processing error. This reduced the amount I had to recover directly from Farhad by approximately $40,000, with the bank absorbing a portion of the loss. This was not a result I had expected, and it was a meaningful contribution to the outcome. The accounting of the $312,000 at the point of legal proceedings. $180,000 in Farhad's personal account. Frozen pursuant to the legal proceedings. $132,000 disbursed to my mother as her purported estate share. This amount was complex. It was money my mother had received, which was partially legitimate and partially not, and the resolution of this required careful accounting of what she was actually entitled to from the estate versus what she had received from the unauthorized account. My mother's legitimate estate share from the house sale and other assets was separately calculated. The $132,000 she had received from the account was in excess of her legitimate share in certain respects and below it in others, and the eventual accounting produced a number that required her to return a portion and receive an adjusted amount. I will not detail the specific numbers for my mother's share because her financial situation is hers and the specifics are private. What I will tell you is that the resolution was structured to minimize the harm to her, She had been managed by Farhad in this as in other things, and her cooperation with the legal process was a significant factor in what was recovered. The bank's contribution, Farhad's frozen funds, and the repaid real estate commission together produced a total available for recovery. After Robert's fees, after the bank's offset, after the probate court costs, after the adjustments for my mother's situation, I recovered $241,000 of the $312,000. The remaining $71,000 was the gap produced by legal costs, the bank's partial settlement, and certain funds that Farhad had spent before the freeze was applied. $241,000 of $312,000. Not complete, but substantial. My grandmother had built $312,000 over 13 years. I recovered $241,000 of it. What she had built was largely intact. What my uncle had attempted was largely unsuccessful. I want to tell you about Farhad's position during the proceedings, because it is relevant to understanding the full shape of what happened. He did not, at any point, fully deny what he had done. His legal strategy was not denial, it was characterization. He characterized what he had done as a good faith effort to manage a complicated estate. He characterized the compensation he had taken as a reasonable reflection of his time and contribution. He characterized the failure to disclose his real estate commission as an oversight. None of these characterizations were accepted by the court as sufficient explanations. The judge in the probate matter was particularly direct about the misrepresentation to the bank. The estate was your mother's. You were not appointed executor. You presented yourself as executor to a financial institution to obtain access to funds that did not belong to the estate and certainly did not belong to you. This court finds no basis for characterizing this as a good faith error. Farhad's attorney presented arguments in mitigation. He had not spent all the funds. He had cooperated with the proceedings once the freeze was in place. He had a long history of involvement in his mother's practical affairs. The court noted the mitigation but did not find it dispositive. The outcome for Farhad was the frozen funds, the required repayment of the real estate commission, a formal probate court finding of misconduct in the estate administration, and a referral to the State Bar's Real Estate Licensing Authority for review of the commission issue. The licensing authority's review was ongoing when I last had information about it. I do not know its outcome. There are two things I need to tell you before I get to where things are now. The first is about my grandmother's journals. My grandmother had kept journals since 1979, when she arrived in the United States. Not every day, she was not a daily journal keeper, but regularly, when something seemed important enough to document. She wrote in Persian, in the specific script she had learned as a girl and maintained throughout her life. The journals were in a box in the closet of the spare bedroom in the Silver Spring house. They were part of the personal property distribution, and when the estate was finally resolved and the house was sold and the personal property distributed, the journals came to me. Not because the will specified them for me. The will distributed personal property among family members generally. But because when my mother went through the house and found the journals and looked at them, she gave them to me. She said, "She would have wanted you to have these." She was right. When I read them, and I have been reading them slowly, a few pages at a time, over the past 2 years, the journals are full of observations about the family and the community and the world that are characteristic of my grandmother at her most specific and her most unguarded. The account is mentioned in the journals. She first writes about it in 2008, the year she opened it. She describes why she opened it. She writes that she has understood something about the family, she does not specify what, and that she wants there to be something specific and unambiguous for the person who she believes will go furthest from the family's gravitational center. She writes, "Leila will leave. She should leave. The further she goes, the more she will have to come back to. I want to make sure there is something specific for her to come back to, something that cannot be absorbed into the family's accounting." She writes, later, in 2011, "Farhad asked me today about my finances. He does this periodically, framing it as concern. I have learned to give him enough information to satisfy the concern without giving him enough to understand the full picture. This is a balance I maintain with care. She writes, in 2015, after my visit, I told Leila about the account today. She was surprised. She asked why I had not told her mother. I told her that some things are between the person who built them and the person they were built for, and that adding more people to that knowledge adds more opportunities for the knowledge to be used in ways you did not intend. She understood. She is good at understanding. She writes, in 2019, I am 77 years old. I have organized what I have organized. I have told who I needed to tell. If anything goes wrong after I am gone, Leila will figure it out. She is the one who goes furthest and comes back clearest. I trust that. She trusted that. She was right to trust it. The second thing I need to tell you is about the conversation with my mother that happened 6 months after the settlement. Not the conversations about the legal process. I have described those. A different conversation. A conversation that happened on a Saturday afternoon in her kitchen in Silver Spring, when the legal matters were resolved and the money was where it was supposed to be and there was nothing procedural left to discuss. My mother made tea. She is always making tea. She is her mother's daughter in this and in other ways. We sat at her kitchen table. She said, I want to talk about something that is not about the money. I waited. I should have known what he was doing, she said. Not the specifics. I didn't know the specifics. But I should have known that something was off. You trusted him, I said. I have always trusted him too much, she said. He is my older brother. For 60 years I have trusted him with things that I should have looked at myself. I said. Nana knew this. She built the account because she knew this. My mother looked at her hands. She knew he would do something, she said. And she knew I would let him. She prepared for what she knew, I said. She always did, my mother said. We sat quietly for a moment. Then my mother said, she showed me the account once. Just briefly, years ago. She said she was putting something aside. She didn't tell me who it was for, or where it was. I didn't ask questions because she made it clear she wasn't offering questions. But you knew something existed. I knew she was careful with things in ways that she didn't always explain. And when Farhad told you there was an account he was handling? She was quiet. I should have asked more, she said. I should have asked what account and whose it was and what authority he had to handle it. I didn't ask because it was easier not to. Yes, I said. That is not something I'm proud of. No, I said. But you eventually did ask. And when you found out what the answers were, you did the right thing. Late, she said. Late, I agreed. But it counted. The settlement funds arrived in March 2022. The full year had passed since my grandmother's death, and the 14 months of legal process had ended. I bought a house. Not in Silver Spring specifically, a different neighborhood in the same general area of Maryland. Close enough to my mother that Sunday dinners are 20 minutes away. Far enough to be mine. 3 bedrooms. A garden that needs work. A kitchen with specific light in the afternoons. My grandmother's things, the things that came to me through the personal property distribution, are in the house. The specific pieces of furniture she had brought from Iran. The photographs. The coffee cups she had used every morning of her adult life in America. A specific pattern she had found in a shop in Silver Spring in 1980 and bought enough of to last a lifetime. The journals are in the study. In a specific box I bought for them, archival quality, because I intend them to last. The account documentation, the statements, the bank records, the legal filings, Robert's correspondence, is in a filing cabinet in the office, organized in a system I inherited from my grandmother who inherited her system from her nursing training. Documentation matters. Keep the documentation. I want to tell you about something specific that I found in the journals from 2020. The year before my grandmother died. She was 78 in 2020. The pandemic had arrived. She was managing her isolation with a specific discipline she brought to everything. Structured days, regular calls, the garden as a constant that provided outdoor time. She was thinking, as people think when they are older and the world has gone strange, about what matters and what she wanted to have said. She wrote about the account in March 2020. She wrote, "The account has grown. It is more than I expected when I started it 12 years ago. I hope it is enough. I hope when Leila finds it, and she will find it, I have made sure of that, I hope it represents something she can use. Not as a windfall, as a foundation. A windfall is something you receive by luck. A foundation is something built specifically for you. This was built specifically for her. I want her to understand the difference. I want her to use it the way you use a foundation, not by spending it but by building on it." She was not a sentimental woman in the conventional sense. She did not write sentimental things in the journals. She wrote observations, precise and sometimes pointed, about what she saw and what she thought. This passage is not typical of her writing, but she had apparently felt that she needed to say something about what she intended, that the writing was the only way to say it, since she had no way of knowing whether she would have the conversation directly. She didn't have the conversation directly. She died in April 2021. I read this journal entry in February 2022, while the legal settlement was in its final stages and before the money had arrived. I was in the study of my new house. I had moved in 2 months earlier, buying with savings and a mortgage and the expectation that the settlement would close. And I read this passage and I sat with it for a long time. She had built it as a foundation. A foundation is something you build on. I thought about that. I am building on it. The specific things I have done with the settlement funds are mine to decide, and I will not enumerate them all here. But I will tell you the category of thing. I made an investment in the house, improvements that make it more functional and more mine. Not extravagant. Practical, in the way she was practical. I made an investment in my professional situation, taking a year between the London contract and the next assignment to develop a specialization I had been wanting to develop, which required time and study, and which I had not been able to afford without the settlement. I made a contribution to a scholarship fund at a nursing school in Maryland. In her name, Leila Nazari. A small annual scholarship for nursing students who are immigrants or first-generation Americans. Because she had been both of those things, and because nursing had been what she had done, and because the specific combination seemed right. The scholarship was awarded for the first time in the fall of 2022. I attended the ceremony. The recipient was a young woman who had come from Somalia 5 years earlier and who was in her 3rd year of nursing school. She had no idea who Leila Nazari was. She thanked the scholarship committee and mentioned in her brief remarks that she had wanted to be a nurse since she was a child, because a nurse had been kind to her at a particular moment when kindness had mattered. My grandmother would have appreciated the story. She would have been direct about what she appreciated and probably have offered an opinion about the way the room was organized for the ceremony, but she would have appreciated the story. I am still building. The foundation holds. I want to say something about what I understand now that I did not understand before this all happened. My grandmother built the account specifically because she understood that families are not always what they present themselves as, and that love within a family does not guarantee that what you build will reach the person you built it for. She understood this not as a cynical observation but as a practical one. She had watched her family for decades. She had seen Farhad's specific orientation toward resources that were accessible. She had seen my mother's specific tendency toward deference. She had seen my absence from the room where things were decided. And she had built a structure that did not require the room. The account was specifically designed to bypass the family's accounting. Not because she did not love her family. She did, in the complicated and specific way of a woman who has been in relationship with people for 60 and 70 years. But because she understood that love and protection are not the same thing, and that the protection she needed to provide required going around the love rather than through it. She went around it. Quietly, for 13 years, with regular deposits and a beneficiary designation that no one else knew about. And then she told me, specifically, in the document that said, "Tell no one." I told no one. For 6 years I told no one. When it became impossible to tell no one, when the bank called and I flew home and the legal process began, I told the people who needed to know. The telling was hard. The telling was the beginning of a family rupture that has not fully healed and that may not fully heal. My mother's relationship with Farhad is permanently changed. My relationship with him is essentially non-existent. Daria and I are in the specific diplomatic distance of cousins who have been through something and who maintain civility as a form of respect for the connection we once had. These are not outcomes I would have chosen. My grandmother would not have chosen them either. But she had made a different choice in 2008, when she understood what the alternative was, and she had sustained that choice through 13 years of deposits and one conversation at a desk in a Silver Spring bedroom in 2015. She made her choice. I am living with the outcomes of it. There are specific practical things I want to say, because this story should be useful and not just personal. Beneficiary designations are independent of wills. This is the most important practical lesson in this story. An account with a beneficiary designation does not pass through the estate. It does not require probate. It does not require the executor's involvement. It passes directly to the designated beneficiary upon the account holder's death. This independence is the protection. An executor, even a legitimate executor, not a fraudulent one like Farhad, cannot access the account to distribute it as estate property. If someone tells a bank they are the executor and uses that representation to close a beneficiary designated account, they are making a misrepresentation and the bank is processing a fraudulent claim. Know about accounts that name you as a beneficiary. If someone who loves you has told you that you are a beneficiary of an account, get the account information, the institution, the account type, the approximate balance. Get enough information that you can contact the institution after that person dies and assert your claim directly, without waiting for anyone else to inform you. If you are not told but you suspect something exists, ask. You have the right to ask. After the account holder's death, you have the right to contact financial institutions and ask whether any accounts name you as a beneficiary. They may not confirm everything. Financial privacy is real, but you can ask. If something goes wrong, if an account has been closed without your knowledge, if funds have been disbursed to someone else, the institution is your first point of contact. Their cooperation matters and their records are essential. The bank in this story cooperated. They did not always cooperate perfectly in the initial processing, but once the problem was identified, they cooperated with the legal process. That cooperation made a material difference. Find a good attorney quickly. The faster you move once you understand that something is wrong, the more options are available. Funds that are frozen before they are spent are recoverable. Funds that are spent before they are frozen may not be. Speed matters. The house has a garden. I have been working on the garden for 2 years. I am not an experienced gardener. My grandmother was. Her garden in Silver Spring was a thing of specific opinion and accumulated knowledge, and I do not have her decades of gardening to draw on. I am learning. I make mistakes and correct them. I ask the neighbor who has lived next to me since I arrived, and who has gardened for 30 years and who is generous with her knowledge. I planted roses along the south-facing fence this past spring. My grandmother had roses. She had opinions about roses, about which varieties were hardy and which were merely beautiful, about the correct way to prune them, and when to prune them, and what to do with the cuttings. She had shared these opinions with me over the years, both directly and, I discover as I read the journals, in her written observations about the garden. The roses came in this summer. They are not perfect. They will be better next year. The year after that, they will be what they are supposed to be. I am patient. She taught me to be patient. She built an account for 13 years. She deposited money she had earned across 6 decades of work. She waited for me to be ready to receive it. She died before she could watch the resolution of what she had built. But she knew who she was building it for. She knew I would come home. She knew I would figure it out. She is the one who goes furthest and comes back clearest. She trusted that. I am still becoming the person she trusted. The garden is getting there. The house is mine. The foundation holds. My name is Leila Nazari. I am 38 years old. My grandmother built an account for 13 years without telling anyone except me. My uncle accessed it 3 months after she died by misrepresenting himself to a bank. The bank called me in September 2021 to tell me the account had been closed. I flew home. I found an attorney. The court found in my favor. I recovered $241,000 of $312,000. The rest was the cost of having to fight for it. My grandmother knew I might have to fight. She built the account so the fight would be worth having. The house in Maryland is mine. The garden is coming in. The roses will be right next year. She would have told me exactly what I am doing wrong with them and been correct about every word. I miss her every day. That is the most honest ending I have.